There is a very specific flavor of lingering regret that coats a city 3 days after St. Patrick's Day. The plastic shamrocks droop from the street lamps, the gutters still harbor a faint, sour tang of spilled stout, and the local pubs settle into a bruised, exhausted quiet. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of damp, bone-chilling March night that demands the warmth of a hearth and the melancholy weeping of a fiddle. I wasn't looking for a fight, and I certainly wasn't looking for the kind of woman who could curdle my blood and set it on fire in the exact same breath. I was just looking for a pint of Smithwick's and a little acoustic sanity. My friends Calla and Bram flanked me as we ducked into the brazen keel. It was an authentic dive, split neatly down the middle. To the left, the main bar sloshed with casual drinkers and the drone of a muted rugby match. To the right, separated by a heavy oak archway, lay the listening room. It was an intimate space, furnished with scarred wooden tables, uneven floorboards, and a tiny, ankle-high stage. When we claimed a corner booth, the room was a sanctuary. Only 3 other tables were occupied by solitary readers and softly murmuring couples. On the stage, a grizzled man with knuckles like walnuts sawed a bow across a fiddle, accompanied by a younger woman tapping a steady, hypnotic rhythm on a badron. The music wasn't a performance, it was an atmosphere. It wrapped around us, easing the tension of a long work week from my shoulders. Then the barbarians breached the gates. They spilled through the oak archway in a tangle of oversized wool coats, braying laughter and absolute entitlement. There were 8 of them, reeking of expensive cologne and cheap whiskey. A broad-shouldered guy in a tight fisherman's sweater, a man who looked like his name was probably Garrick and who definitely shouted at waitstaff, took point. Without asking, he and his crew began dragging 4 heavy tables across the floor, the wooden legs shrieking against the planks, drowning out the fiddle entirely. They didn't just occupy the room, they consumed it. They ordered trays of violently colorful shots, slamming the heavy glassware down. They shouted their conversations over the music, entirely oblivious to the musicians 10 feet away. When the fiddler launched into a mournful, delicate ballad, Garrick actually barked a laugh, turning to the stage and yelling, "Pick up the tempo, Grandad. We're dying of old age over here." My jaw locked. I glanced at Calla, who was peeling the label off her cider bottle with anxious, rapid scrapes, and then at Bram, who just shook his head, a silent plea for me to keep my temper holstered. I looked back at the stage. The old man's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed firmly on the middle distance. He was a veteran of the pub circuit, he knew the golden rule was to endure. But a hot, prickly sensation was crawling up the back of my neck. I despise bullies and I loathed the careless destruction of a shared space. That was when I noticed her. She was sitting at the edge of the chaotic table, swirling a glass of amber liquid. She didn't look like the rest of them. While Garrick and his clones wore their boisterousness like a uniform, she sat perfectly still. She had dark hair cropped sharply at the jawline, pale skin, and an oversized vintage leather jacket draped over her shoulders. When Garrick bellowed another insult at the stage, I saw her eyes briefly flutter shut, a microscopic flinch, but she was with them, guilt by association. Then the unthinkable happened. She stood up, whispered something into Garrick's ear that made him grin, and walked straight onto the tiny stage. She spoke briefly to the fiddler. To my absolute disbelief, the old man nodded, stepping back to give her the microphone. Garrick slammed his palms on the table. "All right, shut up, you animals, Tamsin's gonna sing." The rowdies actually fell silent. The oppressive noise vacuumed out of the room, leaving a heavy, expectant hush. Tamsin grasped the microphone stand. The fiddler drew a single, sustained note, low and weeping. And then she sang. It was a traditional a cappella intro, something in Old Irish, and it was entirely unfair. Her voice was a velvet hammer. It possessed a haunting, resonant clarity that commanded the air, rich with sorrow and smoke. The hairs on my arms stood up. She was magnificent. But as I looked at Garrick, who was leaning back in his chair, a smug, proprietary grin smeared across his face, the hot prickle on my neck ignited into a raging, petty inferno. They had ruined our peace. They had treated the musicians like stray dogs. And now, they wanted to enjoy an exclusive private concert in the silence they had violently stolen from everyone else. Not on my watch. I leaned forward, locking my elbows on the sticky table, and inhaled deeply. "So anyway, Bram," I bellowed, pitching my voice to the exact, abrasive decibel Garrick had been using. "I told the guy at the garage, you can't charge me for a new alternator if you didn't even fix the belt." Calla gasped, her eyes widening to the size of saucers. Bram stiffened, kicking me viciously under the table. On stage, Tamsin's eyes snapped open. She didn't stop singing, but her gaze locked onto me, sharp and dangerous as a scalpel. I didn't break eye contact. I picked up my empty pint glass and began casually, rhythmically tapping it against the wooden table. Clack, 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 right off the beat of the song. Seriously, Calla, I shouted over a particularly beautiful crescendo. You should have seen the look on his face, absolutely priceless. The silence at Garrick's table shattered. Three of the men turned around, their faces twisting in confusion, then immediate hostility. Garrick half stood, his chair scraping violently backward. Hey, he barked, pointing a thick finger at me. Shut your mouth. She's singing. I stopped tapping the glass. I leaned back, crossing my arms, and met Garrick's furious glare. I looked at him, then at the other glaring faces at his table, and finally back to Tamsin, who had lowered the microphone, the gorgeous melody dying in the air. Sucks, doesn't it? I said, projecting my voice so it carried clearly through the stunned room. When you're trying to enjoy the music but some loud-mouthed asshole ruins it for everyone. The pub froze. The fiddler blinked, lowering his bow. Garrick's face flushed a deep mottled crimson, the veins in his thick neck surfaced like tree roots. He took a heavy step away from his table, his fists balling up at his sides. Right, that's it, Bram hissed, grabbing the back of my jacket. We're leaving, now. Calla was already out of the booth, practically sprinting for the archway. Bram hauled me to my feet. I let him pull me along, keeping my eyes locked on Garrick until we crossed the threshold, slipping through the main bar and bursting out into the freezing, damp street. The cold mist hit my face, shocking the adrenaline right out of my system. We fast-walked 2 blocks before Bram finally let go of my jacket, shoving me into the brick wall of a closed bakery. Are you out of your mind, Torin? Bram panted, his breath pluming in the amber streetlight. That guy had 50 pounds on you. He was going to fold you into a pretzel. He was a parasite, I countered, straightening my collar, though my hands were shaking slightly. Someone had to equalize the room. Congratulations, Batman, you saved acoustic night, Calla muttered, hugging her coat tightly around herself. Can we just go home? My nerves are shredded. I nodded, reaching into my pockets for my keys. My fingers brushed lint. I patted my jacket. I patted my jeans. A hollow dread opened in my stomach. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned. What? Bram asked, his voice flat with preemptive exhaustion. My keys, they're on the table in the booth. Calla actually whimpered. Torin, you cannot go back in there, they will kill you. I will have to explain to your mother that you died over a folk song. I'll be quick. I'll go through the side alley door, grab them, and slip out before Neanderthal man even notices. Wait by the car. Before they could argue, I turned and jogged back the way we came. The mist was thickening, turning the street lamps into hazy, glowing orbs. I slipped down the narrow alleyway that ran parallel to the brazen keel. It smelled of wet cardboard and fry oil. The heavy metal side door was propped open with a rusted keg, leaking the dull thumping bass of the pub's jukebox into the night. As I approached the sliver of light spilling from the doorway, a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. Forget something? I stopped dead. Tamsin was leaning against the damp brickwork, a slim cigarette pinched between her fingers. The cherry glowed bright orange as she took a drag, illuminating the sharp angles of her face. Up close, without the barrier of the stage, she was incredibly intimidating. Her dark eyes were fixed on me, calculating and cool. Just my keys, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my pulse was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Are your bodyguards waiting inside to ambush me? She exhaled a thin stream of gray smoke into the mist. Garrick isn't my bodyguard, he's my brother's idiot friend, and right now he's inside explaining to the bouncer why he shouldn't be thrown out for threatening a patron. Good, he earned it. Tamsin tilted her head, studying me. You've got a lot of nerve, I'll give you that, but your timing is garbage. My timing? I scoffed, taking a step closer. The scent of her clove smoke, vanilla, and the crisp bite of the cold air cut through the grime of the alley. Your table hijacked the entire room. You treated those musicians like a jukebox you didn't have to pay for. I was just giving them a taste of their own medicine. And you decided the best time to dispense this medicine was the exact moment I managed to get them to shut up, she countered, her voice dropping an octave, dangerously smooth. I didn't get on that stage to show off. I got up there because it's the only way to get Garrick to stop talking. I sing, he shuts up out of some misplaced sense of loyalty, and the musicians get a 5-minute breather. I had a whole set list planned just to buy them time. The righteous anger that had fueled me for the last 20 minutes abruptly evaporated, leaving me feeling incredibly, profoundly stupid. Oh, I said eloquently. Tamsin pushed off the wall, stepping into my personal space. She was shorter than I was, but the sheer force of her presence made me feel like I was looking up. Yeah, oh. So while you were busy playing the heroic vigilante, you effectively ruined the only strategy I had to keep the peace. And, she added, her eyes flashing, you ruined my favorite song. I swallowed hard. You have a beautiful voice. It slipped out before I could stop it. The tension in the alleyway shifted, snapping from hostile to something entirely different, something heavy and electric. Tamsin blinked, the aggressive set of her shoulders faltering for a fraction of a second. Don't try to flatter your way out of this, she murmured, though the bite had left her words. I'm not. I was furious and I still wanted to listen to you. It was infuriating. I let out a short, self-deprecating laugh, rubbing the back of my neck. I'm Torin, and I am apparently a massive idiot. She stared at me for a long moment. The distant bass of the pub thumped against the brickwork. The damp air suddenly felt much too warm. Slowly, the corner of her mouth twitched upward, a reluctant, devastating smirk. Tamsin, she said. She reached into the pocket of her leather jacket and pulled out a brass ring laden with keys, tossing them in a high arc. I caught them out of the air, staring at them in shock. How did you? I saw them on your table after your dramatic exit, figured you'd be back for them. She dropped her cigarette, crushing it under the heel of her boot. Consider it a peace offering or a hostage negotiation. Thank you, I said softly, slipping the keys into my pocket. I didn't want to leave. The idea of walking back to the car, away from this alley, suddenly felt like a terrible mistake. Look, I owe you an apology, and a drink, preferably at a bar where no one knows us and no one throws furniture. Tamsin crossed her arms, a glint of genuine amusement dancing in her dark eyes. You owe me more than a drink, Torin. You owe me an uninterrupted performance. Name the time and place, I replied instantly. I promise to keep my mouth shut. She reached out, her cool fingers lightly brushing against my wrist as she pulled a pen from her inner jacket pocket. Before I could process the touch, she took my hand, flipped it over, and scrawled a series of numbers across my palm in black ink. The scratch of the ballpoint sent a shiver straight up my arm. Don't wash your hands tonight, she instructed, capping the pen and stepping back toward the metal door. She paused, the warm pub light catching the auburn highlights in her dark hair. I'll hold you to that drink, Torin, and next time. Let me finish the song. With a final, lingering look, she slipped back inside, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, plunging the alley back into quiet mist. I stood there for a long time, looking down at the numbers inked onto my skin, the faint scent of vanilla and clove still hanging in the air. I had walked into the brazen keel looking for vengeance, but I walked out holding something infinitely better. Sometimes, the universe disguises its best gifts as catastrophic annoyances. We rush to judgment, eager to cast ourselves as the righteous hero and everyone else as the villain. But if we let our pride blind us, we might just shout over the most beautiful music we've ever heard. Stand your ground against injustice always. But remember to leave a little room for context, for grace, and for the possibility that the person standing across the battle line might just be exactly who you've been looking for. If you loved this story, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you made a snap judgment that turned out to be completely wrong, and join us next time for another story that turns the unexpected into the unforgettable.